Shadow Hack. Chapter 361, The Threshold of 3,000 Contribution Points. So her name is Nakht. Is it her real one, or? Li Yunmu paid no attention to the people jeering at him. Soon, the black-gowned woman turned away from him, which allowed Li Yunmu to calm down, and his mind returned to the four-source manuscript in her booth. He had barely reached out with his hand to pick one of them when a black metal-colored hand stopped him. What? I can't take a look. Li Yunmu was puzzled seeing that the one stopping him was precisely the black-gowned woman. No can do, she said. If you can't even read the summary, then why would anyone purchase it? I at least need to know the quality of these source manuscripts. Seeing the summary can be done, but you must pay 3,000 contribution points first, the black-gowned woman said without any inflection in her voice. What? This time, Li Yunmu was truly shocked. He hadn't expected that there would actually be such a person in this world who would indulge in their wild fantasies to the extreme. For one look at the summary, she asked for 3,000 contribution points? It was no wonder then that everyone only checked out the other books at her shop, but no one looked at the four source manuscripts. After all, there was apparently an unwritten condition which was outside the realm of reason. Li Yunmu was unresigned and asked with a bit of hope, if I paid you the contribution points, but decided that I don't want to purchase anything, what would happen in that case? They won't be returned. The 3,000 contribution points are for seeing the summary and won't be considered as the down payment, the other party replied in a righteous manner. Instantly, Li Yunmu was left dumbstruck and unable to reply. 3,000 contribution points was for just seeing the summary of the source manuscripts. Regardless of whether the person purchase it or not, exchange for it or not, it was all unrelated. None of the others standing nearby found this unusual, seeming to already know about the black-gowned woman's rules. However, Li Yunmu's next actions left them flabbergasted. All right, here are 3,000 contribution points. No one had expected that there would appear such an idiot in this world who would surprisingly agree to pay 3,000 contribution points just to take a look at the summaries of some unknown manuscripts. Everyone had thought that this kind of scene would never happen. Regardless of how long this black-gowned woman waited, no one would be duped. Yet such a person actually appeared. Everyone suddenly looked at Li Yunmu with pity and envy. If their gazes could talk, they would certainly be saying that he was an idiot with money. Even the black-gowned woman hadn't expected that there would appear someone who would agree to spend 3,000 contribution points just to take a look at the summaries of her source manuscripts. She was distracted for a rather long time, before taking out her inscribed tile to receive the payment from Li Yunmu. The inscribed tiles used by the Flux experts were actually a technologically advanced products, which Li Yunmu had noticed long ago. In the whole origin world, there didn't seem to be the least bit of technology or electricity used, but the inscribed tile was actually a technologically advanced item. Besides the ordinary people who used silver sand coins and gold granules, physical and not Flux experts used life points and contribution points for trading. Both of them didn't have any material existence and were only recorded on the inscribed tiles. Regardless of how much the user required, he could transfer that amount with just one thought from the tile after putting it in contact with the other party's inscribed tile. Li Yunmu didn't know why such a technologically advanced product like this would appear in the origin world. He could only think of the possibility that the people who occupied the highest positions in the origin world meticulously suppressed the development of science and technology in this world. After handing over the 3,000 contribution points, Li Yunmu didn't care what the others thought about him. He had his reasons to act like an idiot. First, the chance to encounter source manuscripts was just too rare. At the moment, he had more than 300 ape gods under his control, but he didn't have the right cultivation methods to increase their strength. Second, the system had informed him that the paper of these source manuscripts was over 10,000 years old. Once Li Yunmu heard that, he was unwilling to miss out on them. If his gamble was wrong, he would just lose 3,000 contribution points and that's it. He had a secret method to refine croton in his hands, so 3,000 contribution points would end up as just a trifling amount to him in no time. After he paid the price, the black-gowned woman didn't stop him from looking at the summaries. When Li Yunmu read them one by one, he became more and more astonished. Although he couldn't see the full contents, just the summaries at the front, the more he read, the more shocked he became. He suddenly discovered that his thinking had been wrong. The 4 source manuscripts surprisingly weren't the lowest level trash. But that raised another question. Since they weren't the lowest level trash source manuscripts, why in the world was this black-gowned woman selling them here? Could the natives of the origin world be so extravagant that they could casually sell such manuscripts that could become the foundation of a sect? And not only 1 but 4 of them? After a careful observation, he found that the 4 manuscripts surprisingly formed a set of inheritance. The first source manuscript was called Profound Dragon Cultivation. Its name sounded simple, but once Li Yunmu looked at the detailed summary, he became aware that this was a deadly flux skill which possessed extraordinary power. According to the summary, the creator regarded the user of this skill as a dragon lurking deep within the abyss. Once it rose, it would shock the 4 planes and dominate the 8 aspects. Cultivating this skill would allow the user to absorb a portion of the enemy's flux energy from their attack and use the special revolution of this profound dragon energy to bind it to one's body for a time being. That energy would then be stored in the user's navel until it reached a certain limit, after which it would be utilized in a single shot. Thus, using this skill would allow the user to both absorb the enemy's flux energy as well as use it to counterattack. According to the overview, this skill possessed a certain amount of defensive capabilities as well as the ability to explosively increase one's energy. Once the stored energy exploded, the formidable might released would be extremely astonishing. System: analyze the grade of this profound dragon energy. Li Yunmu didn't dare to look more. As a hint of doubt arose in his heart, he again picked up the second source manuscript, which was named Profound Dragon Strength. The same 2 words at the beginning of this skill provided further confirmation for Li Yunmu's conjecture. After careful analysis, he found that Profound Dragon Cultivation and Profound Dragon Strength complemented each other. If Profound Dragon Cultivation absorbed enemy's flux energy and bound it to one's body until a certain amount was reached and it would be used for an explosive counterattack, then Profound Dragon Strength reinforced it. Chapter 362, even if it costs an arm and a leg. Profound Dragon Strength's modus operandi was quite similar to that of Profound Dragon Cultivation. The only difference was in the flux energy used. Profound Dragon Cultivation used the flux energy of the enemy while Profound Dragon Strength used one's own. This could be used to burst forth with a large amount of energy, which made it a pretty good skill. But if it was used alone, this skill couldn't be regarded as much. Even without the system's analysis, Li Yunmu could estimate that it definitely didn't surpass B grade. But if Profound Dragon Strength was used to provide assistance to Profound Dragon Cultivation, then their combined grade would increase to one which Li Yunmu couldn't estimate. The skill which used enemies' flux energy as well as one's own was simply like a wild fantasy. Host, the result of the analysis has come out. If the summaries of the 2 skills aren't exaggerating, then Profound Dragon Cultivation is a B grade skill and Profound Dragon Strength is C grade. But both of them used together can produce effects equivalent to those of an SS grade skill. At the end of the analysis, even the system sounded a bit surprised. Are you certain? How could the difference be so large? SS grade battle skill. After hearing the system's analysis, Li Yunmu couldn't help but cry out in surprise. A B grade skill used together with a C grade skill could produce the effects of a SS grade killing skill? This speculation was indeed too astonishing. If this was true, then Li Yunmu was certain that when Profound Dragon Cultivation and Profound Dragon Strength were used together, an unknown qualitative change happened due to some unknown rotating method. SS grade was already equivalent to Great Sun Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow secrets which Li Yunmu had cultivated previously. While extremely bewildered, he went toward the 3rd source manuscript which was called Profound Dragon Steps. Its first two words were the same. From that moment on, Li Yunmu was certain that those source manuscripts were certainly an inheritance from the person who created them. And that creator was definitely a rarely seen talent, for otherwise, this set of source manuscripts wouldn't been graded so highly by the system. Profound Dragon Strep was similar to the above two source manuscripts. In simple terms, this skill was only a mediocre flux step skill without any strange moves and was at most B grade. But what if it was used together with Profound Dragon Cultivation and Profound Dragon Strength? The result left even the system perturbed. It was surprisingly SSS grade. It has to be known that even with the system and a large amount of space elements, Li Yunmu could only exchange 3A grade cultivation methods for an S grade 1, or perhaps SS grade if he was lucky. As for the probability of SSS grade, it was minuscule. It required 3 peak A grade cultivation methods and a large amount of luck in that the 3 cultivation methods had to be compatible with each other. If there was the least bit of problem in compatibility, the end result wouldn't reach SSS grade. But even if Li Yunmu obtain an SSS grade cultivation method, then what? He would only obtain a cultivation relaying globe of an SSS grade cultivation method and not the source manuscript. Therefore, he was greatly shocked inside. He had surprisingly discovered a combination of 3 cultivation methods which were equivalent to an SSS grade cultivation method, and they were even in source manuscript form. The summary of Profound Dragon Steps was very simple. If the user moved according to the special footwork as well as rotated their flux energy according to the special route, their legs would be able to draw a certain amount of geocentric flux energy. If this geocentric flux energy was used together with Profound Dragon Cultivation and gained assistance from Profound Dragon Strength, then the combined might would instantly reach an SSS grade. According to the system's analysis, the flux energy produced from the combination of the 3 would undergo a qualitative change. When 3 powers of different nature that moved through 3 different sets of paths were combined, their power would reach the level of Li Yunmu's Flame Thunder energy. Thus, it could be considered as a power source approaching divine level. At that instant, Li Yunmu didn't dare to think much and quickly moved toward the 4th book. This one didn't have the name Profound Dragon, which caused Li Yunmu to breathe a sigh of relief. After all, the combination of the previous 3 source manuscripts was already quite astonishing. If the 4th source manuscript had increased the combined power even more, then would the world even accept it? The system had verified that these source manuscripts were at least 24,312 years old, but Li Yunmu still didn't dare to be certain that the summaries were identical with the contents inside. The 4th manuscript was known as Meridian Nurturing Flux Point Technique. When Li Yunmu read its name, his heart began to beat wildly. The 4th source manuscript was the easiest to understand. Its name was extremely ordinary, and it could even be said that this source manuscript couldn't even be called as one, but rather a sort of secret technique. However, Li Yunmu's heart kept beating crazily upon noticing it. He didn't dare to believe that after the previous source manuscripts that belonged to Profound Dragon series, he would find such an ordinary manuscript. Why had he spent the past few months toiling laboriously to refine Power Grain? His aim was only one: to obtain enough contribution points to purchase a flux point strengthening secret technique. Today, he had come here to reach exactly this goal. Yet he had encountered something even better than to what he had been looking forward. Li Yunmu impatiently opened it to take a look, and after a long while, he sighed and lifted his head again. Just as he lifted his gaze, his eyes met with the eyes of the black-gowned woman. "The fluctuations in your heart were quite large," Nakht said calmly. "What do you need in exchange for them?" Li Yunmu asked bluntly. He didn't bother to hide or conceal the fact that he wanted them since the person who was selling them already knew about it. Li Yunmu prepared himself mentally that even if it cost him an arm and a leg, he had to get his hands on these source manuscripts. If you can save a certain person's life, then they are yours. The time limit is 3 days. The black-gowned woman's reply caught Li Yunmu off guard. Unexpectedly, it wasn't an item or contribution points, but rather a life that she wanted in exchange. Chapter 363, H.A.C.K Clan. Hall Mountain Island was located 1,800 kilometers to the west of Blue Moon Island. Although it was part of the latter's territory, but people rarely went there. There was a clan of primitive Aboriginals residing on that island who called themselves the H.A.C.K Clan. In the boundless origin world, apart from the natives, there were also many clans of Aboriginals of the human race. They had preserved their several tens of thousands of years of tradition, from never leaving their territories to drinking raw blood and worshipping bonfires as god of fire. There had been 1,086 Aboriginal clans long ago, but after passing through the long river of time, most were on the verge of extinction, with only 2 or 3 of their members remaining. There were roughly around 200 Aboriginal clans who were still able to preserve their status as a clan. And the H.A.C.K clan was one of those 200. They had strange abilities and great courage. The H.A.C.K clansmen also possessed strong primitive battle instincts as well as matchless unity. Thus, even Blue Moon Island had been unable to eliminate them when occupying a region of their territory. It wasn't that Blue Moon Island didn't think of it, but rather that it didn't have sufficient strength. Fortunately, the Aboriginal clans of the origin world usually didn't go out of their territory where they had been established for several generations. Thus Hall Mountain Island was basically considered as the territory of the H.A.C.K clan. Usually, neither the fishermen nor the people of Blue Moon Island would court disaster by setting foot on that island. How far are we? At this time, Yunmu was seated on an enormous devil serpent. 2 days ago, after he agreed to Nakht's request in the contribution hall of Blue Moon Island, the 2 of them had left on a journey, hastened regardless of whether it was day or night. Nakht's time limit was 3 days, but just while rushing to Hall Mountain Island, 2 days and 2 nights had already passed. And this was when they were using a beast from the enormous category to travel. Otherwise, the timeline of 3 days would have been far from sufficient. Yunmu was extremely anxious at that moment. According to logic, he was the rescuer and rather than him, the person who hired him should be more anxious. But after hearing about the matter from Nakht, Yunmu couldn't calm down. The reason was that she had already been at the contribution hall for many days. The 3-day time limit was there just to test him. It was simply that the sick person couldn't wait anymore. After struggling for so many days, they only had 3 more days left. If that sick person died before Yunmu arrived there, then there would be no way for him to get his hands on the 4 source manuscripts. After all, they were given to Nakht by her classmen to find help. The person who possessed the final authority wasn't Nakht. In fact, she hadn't even opened the summaries of the 4 source manuscripts. Yunmu couldn't understand this mysterious woman who never revealed her true colors, but every time he looked into her eyes, his heart would throb crazily. What sort of sensation was this? Even he himself didn't know. We're about to reach the island. You should prepare to hasten for the next part. Yunmu was anxious, but Nakht was even more anxious. The sick person was probably a close kin of hers. But unfortunately, she had met Yunmu too late. While both of them were extremely anxious, the devil serpent quickly traveled through the ocean. The movement speed of this enormous beast category monster surpassed that of several 100-meter large cruises. Yunmu was quite flabbergasted that Nakht could control such a creature. How formidable was she exactly? Her strength was probably no worse than that of Wang Hu, who was about to advance to great Flux Masters. Only with a strength approaching that of Sage Layer would she be able to control an enormous beast category monster. After 2 more hours, as Yunmu's mood grew more gloomy with each passing moment, their destination finally appeared in front of them. Hall Mountain Island was an extremely expansive place, its area surpassing that of Blue Moon Island. Even from a distance of 10 kilometers, Yunmu could clearly see the mountain ranges spread all over the island. The large mountain range was around 2,000 meters high, which was quite shocking, and passed through the jungles which occupied 90% of the island. When Nakht led Yunmu onto the island, he was hit by a strong smell of a subtropical jungle. Until then, he had seen no traces of human habitat. Move quickly, there's still a long distance to cover to reach the stronghold of H.A.C.K clan. The next instant, they entered the jungle and began to run. Li Yunmu even activated his 5 times strengthened Great Heart and unleashed the Spirit Pincer Step which could move through all terrain, only then was he barely able to keep up with Knight's speed. It wasn't that his speed was slow, but that the gravity of the origin world was extremely strong. As they increased their speed, the journey became more and more demanding for him. Fortunately, Li Yunmu's physical strength wasn't bad. Although he only had the strength of 18 oxen, the endurance of his fleshly body far surpassed that value. Night was astonished when she saw that Li Yunmu could run that fast. The jungle on the island was extremely dangerous. It wasn't like Blue Moon Island where humans had disposed not only of the enormous beasts, but also the vicious category ones. If Li Yunmu encountered an enormous beast, he would have no other option but to escape for his life. Night took out a wooden carving of a mythical monster's skull. After that, Li Yunmu noticed that the vicious beasts and those above would themselves avoid to cross their path. Li Yunmu envied this item taken out by Night which could put pressure on the majority of the enormous beasts. It was definitely a divine item. Compared to any sage treasure, it was a great height. But the most rare thing about this item was that it was extremely useful, rather than just being flashy. Finally, after traveling at a speed of 180 km/h without any hindrance, they reached the center of the dense jungle. There, Li Yunmu discovered numerous houses spreading into the distance. It was Li Yunmu's first witnessing of the Aborigines of the origin world. Looking at the number of houses, he estimated that the number of H.A.C.K clansmen wouldn't surpass 500. When they moved forward, Li Yunmu with his keen intuition, discovered that there were densely packed tree houses built at the top of the trees in the surroundings as well. The positions chosen for those tree houses were quite clever. After paying close attention, he even discovered many archers in them. Yet he still couldn't figure out how these aboriginals were able to cause concern for Blue Moon Island which had more than 10,000 inner disciples. Chapter 364, Widowed Nakht. With inquisitive eyes, Li Yunmu looked at the wooden bows held by the H.A.C.K clansmen. The moment his gaze fell on them, his heart skipped a beat in fear. The power emitted by those wooden bows. Surprisingly, it was extremely close to his flame thunder energy. Unexpectedly the aboriginals possessed divine-level power source. Li Yunmu finally understood why Blue Moon Island's people had apprehensions about the H.A.C.K clansmen. With this group, all of whose members possessed a power source surpassing quasi-deity level, even if it didn't belong to them personally, it would still be enough to terrify others. Night's arrival alarmed all the H.A.C.K clansmen in the stronghold. A large number of men and women came out from all corners of the stronghold and began to loudly converse in a dialect which Li Yunmu couldn't understand. There were both men and women, elderly and children. There was even a group of the latter who were sizing up his strange face with curious eyes. They were puzzled why Li Yunmu's skin color and general appearance was so different from theirs. That's right, the H.A.C.K clansmen had one major difference when compared to humans, which was that they had a small horn rising towards the sky on their forehead. Apart from this, their skin color was also very strange. Li Yunmu sneakily observed that the children's skin was yellow. It looked rather sickly when compared to human skin. While looking at them, Li Yunmu didn't feel comfortable at all, since it gave him a sensation that they were infected by bacteria. The first impression given by these children to anyone would definitely be that they were extremely ill. Although Li Yunmu wasn't someone who judged people by appearances, but this sort of deep-rooted bias still existed. When the children became adults, they underwent a major transformation. Their skin changed color from sickly yellow to mild purple, which gave them a mysterious appeal. So the reason why Night covered her whole body and face should be because of her light purple skin? After all, she is also a H.A.C.K clansman, right? If that was true, then how did she infiltrate Blue Moon Island and been accepted inside? However, Li Yunmu didn't have the time to ponder over this question for long. Soon, they were led to the biggest house at the center of the stronghold by the numerous clansmen. After that, other than Nakht, all the hall clansmen immediately knelt and kowtowed in front of Li Yunmu by knocking their heads against the slab. What are they doing? Li Yunmu dodged to the side, not wanting to accept the hall clansmen's kowtow. Our widowed Nakht is dying quickly, and they came to request you to save her, Nakht translated for him. What is a widowed Nakht? Let's go. While speaking, Li Yunmu already walked into the house. There, he saw an old woman lying on the bed, her body emitting a large amount of death aura. Although she hadn't yet stopped breathing, she looked more dead than some corpses. What is this going on? This isn't the mark of poisoning, is it? Li Yunmu's heart sank. Although he understood that saving a person for whom 4 extraordinary source manuscripts had been taken out wouldn't be so easy, he hadn't expected what he saw. Only when he was finally led to the patient did he become aware that the origin world had a lot of unknown and bizarre things. According to Nakht, widowed Nakht didn't have any vitality, but she hadn't died yet. And although Li Yunmu was a meter away from her, he could already sense the sinister presence hiding within her body that seemed about to erupt at any moment. Widowed Nakht is like our mother. Her body isn't infected by some highly toxic poison, but has been cursed by the evil spirit of an ancient deity. Nakht didn't hold much hope toward Li Yunmu. If he wasn't a noble and hadn't come from the central part of the origin world, she wouldn't have even brought him since he was someone who had just entered the sect. Li Yunmu felt a little awkward. This world's strangeness was indeed hard to fathom. Before this, he had absolute confidence in saving someone because of 2 facts. First, he possessed a bottle of sacred life water. It wasn't the few drops he'd obtained himself, but rather one of the trump cards prepared by Battle Sage Vega. It was little surprise she did that, since there was no better alternative than sacred life water for saving someone's life at a critical juncture. Besides it, he also had plant essence innate healing reversal. With this SSS grade technique together with sacred life water in his arsenal, Li Yunmu had full confidence in saving any person. However, that was only until he learned that the sick person was under the curse of an evil spirit of some ancient deity, which was simply frightening. In his lifetime, he hadn't met any humans who had entered the deity realm, but at that moment he had encountered the traces of an ancient deity. This woman who had been cursed by one, who knew what secrets she was harboring. Li Yunmu felt that he had encountered a serious matter. Yet the source manuscripts were extremely important to him. I will try my best. After some hesitation, Li Yunmu hardened his resolve. Since he had already come here, then how could he miss on those source manuscripts? He first took out the sacred life water. When he removed the cork, the dusky room instantly filled with a life force which was full of vitality. Noticing this, a hint of hope appeared in the eyes of the hall clansmen. After all, when all was said and done, this was a life-saving treasure from the 7th dimension. Even in the origin world, this sacred life water could be considered as a rarely seen precious treasure. It had to be known that the entire 7th dimension had only a few sacred life trees from which sacred life water could be obtained. If Battle Sage Vega hadn't prepared it for Li Yunmu, then it would have been impossible for him to obtain a full bottle. Yet even though it was a full bottle, it only had 30 drops. Ordinary people on their last breath would only need 1 drop to come back from the dead, but for widowed Nakht, Li Yunmu used 3 drops. When they entered her mouth, there was an immediate transformation. The effects showed up almost instantly. The death aura which previously was spread across the entire body of widowed Nakht was forced to retreat by a ball of green light. The death aura is retreating. I hadn't expected that you would actually accomplish it. For the first time, a fluctuation appeared in Nakht's voice. However, before her second sentence was finished, the death aura, which had been retreating because of the effects of sacred life water, began to retake its ground. Although it was very slow, but at that speed, the 3 drops of sacred life water could at most suppress the death aura for half a day. The hall clansmen who had been cheering at first turned silent, despair spreading across their faces. Chapter 365, Li Yunmu's Saving Method. It was the first time Li Yunmu had encountered a problem which couldn't be solved by sacred life water. For such a thing didn't exist on his earth. Regardless of whether one was ill or had been poisoned or even cursed by some evil spirit, all of it could be resolved by the sacred life water. Thus, the matter of H.A.C.K clan's widowed Nakht being under curse was an unprecedented affair for him. Because of it, Li Yunmu was completely convinced that this was truly due to an ancient deity. Otherwise, why would the death aura remain suppressed for only half a day even after she had been given 3 drops of sacred holy water? System, what's the power source of this death aura? Li Yunmu was startled by this, so he asked the system to analyze it. Insufficient data, system is unable to analyze it. However, it is certain that this death aura's power source should be higher level than your flame thunder energy, so system is unable to analyze it for the time being. The system was unable to help him. Yet it still told him that the death aura was surprisingly at least a level higher than a divine power source. Li Yunmu once more experienced the depths of the origin world's waters. He then suddenly recalled that when they had descended to the origin world, they had found a several hundred kilometers long dragon corpse which resembled a mountain range. Even if that dragon had died long ago, there was still a formless might around it that pushed down everyone. In fact, just because of that corpse's existence, the jungle and mountains of that area had surprisingly been blocked from the powerful gravity of the origin world. Whenever Li Yunmu thought about that level of power, his heart began to pound heavily from fear and trepidation. Is it at the same level as that dragon corpse's power which we saw after descending? Li Yunmu asked. Unable to compare, the level of the formless power emitted by the dragon's corpse is definitely several levels higher than that of this death aura. This much, however, is certain, the system replied without the slightest hesitation. Li Yunmu's thinking proved to be correct. The pressure emitted by that dragon's corpse was enough to suppress the system, which was definitely something to which the death aura couldn't compare. Gradually, Li Yunmu started to understand the classification of power sources in the origin world. Clearly, the physical flux experts were the lowest level, possessing only physical strength. Flux experts formed the next level, and they possessed the combined strength of flux energy and corporeal body. Great flux experts formed the third layer. Their flux energy had fused with the dark flux energy to form deadly might. Sage flux experts were the fourth level. Their power source was the sacred deadly might formed after a quantitative change in the deadly might. Beyond that was the divine layer, which was reached after sacred deadly might transformed into divine deadly might. This was the power level to which the quasi-deities were trying to break through. And because of a combination of coincidences like the Great Sun Tyrant Body Muscle Marrow Secrets, Heavenly World's world power as well as the Origin World's world punishment, Li Yunmu had also accidentally stumbled upon it. He thus possessed the flame thunder energy, which was classified as divine deadly might. However, although Li Yunmu possessed it, the bitter reality was that it wasn't cultivated by him but created because of fusion with Origin World's world punishment. Thus, he couldn't cultivate or strengthen this power surpassing his level. Then the level of power infecting widowed Nakht of H.A.C.K clan had to be higher level divine might. For the time being, Li Yunmu classified it as ancient god level power source. As for the dragon corpse, that level of power source far surpassed his imagination. Li Yunmu could only establish it as the highest level of power he had encountered in his life. In this way, Li Yunmu quickly classified the origin world's powers into physical flux experts, great flux experts, sage flux experts, divine flux experts, and ancient god level. While he was pondering about all this, Nakht spoke up by his side. Do you have any other methods? Li Yunmu put away his sacred life water and said, since this death aura cannot be suppressed by the sacred life water, there's no need to increase our loss. I will try another method. He thought about it for a time before sighing gloomily. He planned to never reveal major reversal in front of others, since this skill was one of his biggest hidden trump cards. Plant essence innate healing reversal and ghostly image substitution were the most reliable life-saving techniques in his arsenal. But if he didn't use major reversal, the job wouldn't get done, and he didn't plan to renounce the meat pie in front of him. Li Yunmu sighed deeply, hardening his resolve. I have another supreme life-saving technique, but it will require compatible environment to work. Translate my request for them. After hearing that, a shine passed through Knight's eyes, and she began to translate Li Yunmu's words for the hall clansmen inside the room. All those who could enter widowed Nakht's room were elders who possessed the highest authority in the clan. Once they heard the request, they immediately expressed that regardless of whatever needed to be done, they wouldn't hesitate to pay any price as long as there was a way to save widowed Nakht. Previously, Li Yunmu hadn't been exactly clear about the position occupied by widowed Nakht in the eyes of the clansmen, but at that moment, he understood everything. We request you to help us. Allow me to say in the name of all of the Hall clan's elders that as long as you successfully rescue our widowed Nakht, then besides the inheritance source manuscripts, you will also obtain the friendship of the Hall clansmen, Knight said as she raised the monster statue in the middle of the room. Li Yunmu had a profound impression of that wooden statue and felt a deep awe toward it. But compared to it, Knight's words that he would be considered a friend of the Hall clan made his heart beat much swifter. Chapter 366, Using Quantity to Fight Quality. The offer was one which Li Yunmu couldn't ignore. If he could truly obtain the friendship of the Hall clansmen, many issues could be resolved easily in the future. After all, the Hall clan which had around 500 members had frightened Blue Moon Sect which had over 10,000 inner disciples. That was why Li Yunmu was well aware that the Hall clan wasn't as simple as it looked on the surface. Alright, then I will do my best. Fortunately, the environment around here is in accordance with the requirements of my rescue method. However, I hate three things to say. Li Yunmu raised 3 fingers and said in a louder voice, First, I want your widowed Nakht to be shifted to the region where the forest is the thickest and has lush vegetation. Second, when I will unleash my healing technique, all the plants and vegetation in the surroundings will die. In the worst case scenario, the entire forest might be ruined. Third, this healing method which I possess cannot be passed on to outsiders. As long as you all agree to bear the costs, I will try my best. And after I have succeeded, I must be allowed to choose one of the weapons used by your clan. Li Yunmu firmly stated his price. Soon, the elders consulted for a moment and quickly agreed. Instantly, people standing outside came in to shift widowed Nakht to the prescribed location. It was good that their stronghold was basically built in the abyss of the forest where the vegetation was the most dense. They only needed to shift the widowed Nakht to the forest outside the house. Thus, all the preparations were completed in half a day. Li Yunmu then extended his hand and pressed it on the forehead of the widowed Nakht. He had barely touched her head, when he sensed the evil spirit filled with endless negative will which began to rush towards his consciousness, moving along his finger. In fact, the magnitude of danger faced by Li Yunmu was extremely high. He was trying to resist a higher divine power, which was extremely difficult. In fact, there was a high chance that he might also get indirectly cursed. But after the test with the 3 drops of sacred life water, Li Yunmu had a certain amount of confidence. When the death aura rushed toward his consciousness, Li Yunmu didn't say anything and used the power of the 2-sun heavenly world to resist it. But the power of a 2-sun heavenly world was too weak. In the face of the ancient god-level power, it could only last for some 7 minutes. Then, Li Yunmu used his body's flux energy to increase the suppression. But this time, he could hold on for even less time. In an instant, his resistance was broken. Given how difficult Li Yunmu was finding his task, it could seem that widowed Nakht of the Hall clan was extremely formidable. The seemingly ordinary elder had surprisingly held out against the invasion of the death aura for 18 days. What sort of joke was that? After personally trying it out, Li Yunmu understood the difference between himself and her clearly. His flux energy, world power, all of them were exhausted within a quarter of an hour. But he had another power, and that was flame thunder energy. Get lost! Bang! In the center of Li Yunmu's chest, a steel-grey thunder sun was aroused by his thought, and a power far surpassing the level of flux energy erupted. Li Yunmu had to accept that flame thunder energy was indeed worthy of being called as being on the divine level, something which was the target of quasi-deities. Although Li Yunmu had only reached the minor threshold and accumulated only a bit of that power, it still allowed him to resist against the invasion of death aura. Although it was a higher level power source than the flame thunder energy, but the death aura had left its master, the ancient god's body, long ago and lost all control. Second, the main battlefield here was Li Yunmu's body. Because of that, not only did the flame thunder energy get the advantage of home turf, it also blended with the tribulation thunder of the world punishment. Tribulation thunder was the fiercest power in the world. Although the part of it which had fused into Li Yunmu's body was the lowest level of world punishment, it was about enough to deal with the evil spirit's power. With the support of the flame thunder energy, Li Yunmu got the opportunity he needed, and he began to rotate the plant essence innate healing reversal. Although the effects of this technique weren't as good as those of major reversal, Li Yunmu wasn't just saving a person at that moment. He was also resisting against the power of an ancient god with the power that wasn't just his own. He was using the life force of all the vegetation on Hall Mountain Island. This was the basis for his confidence behind his claim of saving the widowed Nakht. How many trees were there on the island? The answer was simple: many. In truth, so many that Li Yunmu could use them extravagantly. With that, he was certain that the fragment of the ancient gods wouldn't be able to resist him. Come, let me see whether your power is greater, or that of the life force of the vegetation in this entire island. Li Yunmu kept on rotating plant essence innate healing reversal. At that time, he stood barefooted on the ground, using it as the medium and himself as the core. Bearing the brunt of the technique were the trees in Li Yunmu's vicinity. They were extremely large and had been growing for a long time. Some of them were even older than 1,000 years and reached the sky. Their girth was equivalent to more than 10 people joining their hands to make a circle, and their height was more than several hundred meters. But at that instant, they were facing an unprecedented calamity. The enormous life force accumulated by them was being steadily absorbed by Li Yunmu. After passing through his feet, that enormous amount of vitality was transferred to his hands and used to resist against the power of the death aura. Time seemed to stop at that moment. Including Night, all the Hall clansmen were attentively watching each and every transformation happening around Li Yunmu's body. Right then, there were two different forces around Li Yunmu's hand. One was the terrifying death aura, which was the invader. There wasn't much of it, but its level was extremely high. It was like a small spark which could not be extinguished regardless of how much water one poured on it. And the other power was the vast life force. By then, everyone knew why he had asked to come out of the house. Within a short time, the circle of trees closest to him had their vitality completely exhausted. And that calamity didn't stop. It continued to expand toward the next circle of ancient trees. Chapter 367, Return to the Sect. 1 hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 9 hours. No one could say how long the situation would continue. All of the spectators forgot everything else and kept waiting with their hearts in their throats, bodies shaking. Gradually, the night left and the morning came, followed by afternoon. Finally, one Hall clansman couldn't help but cry out in surprise, which was a great disturbance in the tense atmosphere. He succeeded. Heaven, Yunmu succeeded. Increasingly more and more of Hall clansmen began to join in the cheering. It was because at that instant, Li Yunmu was finally able to dispel the death aura which had invaded his hand from widowed Nakht's body after preserving for a full day and night. His fight had lasted 28 hours. While dispelling it, Li Yunmu had also dispersed a large amount of death aura, which was certainly a sign of success. And sure enough, that step had settled his victory. After the majority of the initial amount of the death aura had been dispersed, in another hour, the remaining amount was also exterminated by the enormous amount of vitality. Finally, after a long time, a sign of liveliness appeared in the elderly woman who possessed the unique position of widowed Nakht in the Hall clan. By the time Li Yunmu stopped plant essence innate healing reversal, the trees in the surrounding several kilometers had completely wilted. Deathly stillness prevailed in the circle around him. Although widowed Nakht had been successfully saved, the surroundings of the clan's stronghold had turned into a death zone. The tribesmen would have to move away and build a new stronghold. Fortunately, there was no lack of jungle in Hall Mountain Island. Thus, it didn't bother the Hall clansmen much, at least, their widowed Nakht had returned after the price had been paid. They're saying that you are very capable and the most mystical person they have met. Now, you can also be considered the most intimate friend of the Hall clan, Nakht translated the cheers of the Hall clansmen. I request you to inform them that this Yunmu is very willing to become a friend of Hall clan. I hope this friendship can exist for eternity. When Li Yunmu heard Nakht's words, he promptly put on an act and paid his respects to the Hall clan as their friend. His actions immediately caused the majority of Hall clan to look at him in a favorable light. They were extremely impressed by this modest youngster with etiquette. His actions successfully pulling them in closer. You're not bad, you should know that you are one of the few foreigners accepted by the Hall clan. You have obtained their interest and friendship which hadn't happened in the past several hundred years. Nakht was still covered in the black gown and black mask, revealing only her deep eyes. But Li Yunmu could feel that underneath the expressionless mask, she had smiled for the first time. He found it really beautiful, even if he had only seen the slight change in her eyes. You also from the Hall clan? Li Yunmu was in a good mood. Although he was tired, he couldn't help but ask the question which was constantly on his mind. Yes. I am a Hall clansman. The blood that flows in my body might not be, but I have no doubt about it, Nakht replied in a determined voice. Her reply baffled Li Yunmu. For the next 2 days, he remained in Hall Mountain Island as a guest. The Aboriginals used their best delicacies and enthusiastically entertained him. Although the death aura had been completely eliminated from the body of widowed Nakht, she had become very weak and was still unconscious due to having suffered under it for a long period of time. However, Nakht said that as long as ancient god's evil spirit didn't seize her life, widowed Nakht wouldn't die. After 2 days, Li Yunmu's condition was restored. He then decided to return back to Blue Moon Island. On the trip, he had obtained a great harvest. First, there were the 4 source manuscripts promised by the Hall clan. Second, he had also received an accessory which was a miniature skull of a mythical beast. He was told that it was the beast mount of the fire god worshipped by the Hall clan since ancient times. Its name was Karl Werther, and it looked like a lion and a sinister demon combined into one. Every Hall clansman carried it with them, and all those who possess it were considered as members of the Hall clan. Naturally, it was just a beast skull of ordinary grade and not a high-grade one like that of Nakht. From then on, Li Yunmu knew that Nakht's status was extremely high in the Hall clan. The beast skull which he had obtained only represented that he was comparable to an ordinary member, but even so, this treatment was already breaking the rules of a clan which didn't accept any outsiders. Moreover, Nakht had told him that Hall clansmen weren't as few in number as he'd seen. The origin world was vast and there were Hall clansmen in other places. Thus, his greatest harvest weren't the source manuscripts, but rather the friendship of Hall clansmen whom he hadn't even met yet. On top of that, Li Yunmu had also obtained a weapon used by the Hall clansmen, a wooden pike. Based on appearance, it was an extremely ordinary pike which seemed quite unsightly and blunt. However, after gaining understanding about it in the past days, Li Yunmu knew that the material used to create it was actually very famous in the origin world and possessed a grand reputation. The pike's wood came from primitive trees which were trees that were more than 10,000 years old. In the whole world, there were very few 10,000-year-old trees, and each of them was extraordinary. And Li Yunmu's new pike was created from the wood of primitive trees. It was said that couldn't be damaged even by deities. The wooden pike from the H.A.C.K clan was very mysterious. By using the blood of some monsters together with tree juice, some crisscrossing patterns had been drawn upon the wood which caused the pike to have some mysterious power which not even the gods and ghosts possessed. And that power was precisely what had attracted Yunmu. It interested him from where such an extraordinary power which approached the divine layer had come and how it was born. Chapter 368, Strengthening Flux Points. Yunmu could only put the thought away for the time being and allow the system to research it later. Terrific! I would have never imagined that a pike could possess power comparable to divine level after being marked by some patterns of the H.A.C.K clan. While riding on the Devil Serpent to return to Blue Moon Island, Yunmu was pondering about all sorts of mysteries of the origin world and carefully scrutinizing the pike in his hand. This is the mystery of the H.A.C.K clan, but these weapons made from primitive wood are becoming increasingly more rare because widowed Nakhts in the H.A.C.K clans of all regions are growing older as time passes. Nakht seemed to have touched upon an unpleasant matter. After it, she lost all interest in talking and both of them became silent. However, from Nakht's words, Yunmu understood that only the widowed Nakht could create H.A.C.K clan's mysterious weapons. This allowed him to understand why the widowed Nakht occupied such an important position in the eyes of the H.A.C.K clansmen. After rushing for 2 days, they secretly returned to Blue Moon Island. At that moment, both of them departed of their own initiative without saying anything. Both sides had developed a mutual understanding about not revealing the other's secret. Yunmu wouldn't leak that Nakht was surprisingly a H.A.C.K clansman. Or perhaps she wasn't truly a H.A.C.K clansman, but the faction behind her was certainly such. Nakht in turn wouldn't reveal that Yunmu possessed a mystical technique like plant essence innate healing reversal. In the end, they just exchanged contact cards and went their separate ways. Yunmu then returned to the 15th residential region. After coming into the 50th room, he took out Nakht's contact card and found out that Nakht surprisingly resided in the 2nd residential region. But she hadn't publicly declared her current strength on her contact card. Unexpectedly, it's the 2nd residential region. Perhaps before long, she will also enter the Great Flux Master Layer, Yunmu said with a little disappointment and frustration. He was aware that there were 30 residential areas in the Blue Moon Island, 3 of which were not for new disciples. They were the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd residential regions. Blue Moon Island's people called these 3 regions Elder Ones. They also had another name, and it was Secret Regions. Only those whose strength was near the peak Flux expert level and who possessed a unique background could enter those 3 regions. Yunmu hadn't expected that Nakht would be someone from one of those 3 regions. Presumably, she had been the disciple of Blue Moon Sect for a long time, while Wang Hu was even more fierce. He belonged to the 1st region and was a genuine elder. The trip to Contribution Hall could be regarded as pretty good. On his very first time, he made acquaintances with 2 elders as well as accomplished his goal. Without any hesitation, Yunmu hung the in seclusion, not fighting board on his door and threw himself into studying meridian nurturing flux point technique. Previously it wasn't a battle skill, it didn't need any cultivation relaying globe and could be cultivated directly. Yunmu clearly understood that this secret technique to strengthen flux points did so by pushing them to the breaking limit. In truth, such a technique didn't have much use for the people of the origin world. Under ordinary circumstances, only those born with a weak constitution would need it. However, when that secret technique which could strengthen flux points and nurture meridians fell into the hands of a descender like Yunmu, it became an enormously precious treasure. Just it alone would probably surpass the 5 supreme battlesuits for any quasi-deity on Earth. It was a secret technique to strengthen flux points, reach 108 flux points as well as produce personal deity-level power source. The above-mentioned 3 thresholds were precisely the obstructions in the path of the quasi-deities to enter the deity realm. They were the reason why every quasi-deity of all planes had tried their best to dispatch their representative to the origin realm to fight for a chance to escape the great prisons. And by then, Yunmu had already crossed 2 of the 3 thresholds, while as for the final one, he only lacked 36 flux points to reach the maximum. But crossing this threshold was an easy thing for someone like him who possessed the method to refine power grain. As long as he had enough contribution points, he could enter any sect of the origin world and exchange his points for a technique to open the 36 flux points which he was lacking. It had to be said that in the past year in which they had been away from the earth, Yunmu had already gained a large advantage over the other descenders. As for the meridian nurturing flux point technique, it appeared to be an ordinary technique only until Yunmu took a good look of its core content. At that moment, he discovered how extraordinary was the secret technique. I hadn't expected that there would be such a large disparity in the origin world. Hall clan, how had they obtained this secret technique? Whatever, it must be destined. Them obtaining it must be to help me in accomplishing my goals. The more Yunmu read, the more fascinated he became. At the start, he hadn't anticipated that the secret technique with an ordinary name would surprisingly conceal such a big secret. When he reached the main point and read the few paragraphs written by the creator regarding it, he was extremely shocked. Nurturing meridians, strengthening flux points, expanding muscles, transforming blood, substituting internal organs. In this world, people believe that flux points are bestowed by heavens and cannot be changed. This opinion limits their growth. In the 23,000 years of ancient god calendar, there was once a deity who had boasted that human flux points aren't innately restricted and can be expanded using heavenly materials. For a long time, Yunmu's mind remained submerged in the creator's words, trying to understand the limits of the human body. In time, he understood that the ordinary people of the origin world believe that their innate constitution, that is the strength of their flux points, is bestowed by heavens. This opinion formed a natural barrier. After countless years, there was a deity who coincidentally discovered that this universally recognized theory was wrong. What they knew as the limit of the human body wasn't such, and it wasn't a restriction placed by the world, because the deity had coincidentally discovered that the innate strength of the flux points could be upgraded to the extent of breaking through the universally accepted theory. What exactly does it mean though? Chapter 369, Concocting an Elixir. After careful scrutiny, Yunmu discovered that the core of the meridian nurturing flux point technique were the words in the first line meaning nurturing meridian, strengthening flux point, expanding muscle, transforming blood, and substituting internal organs. Only when someone became perfect in these 5 points could the flux points be developed and a future path of cultivation opened. In the beginning, Yunmu couldn't understand it. But after reading through the text carefully for one more time, he suddenly understood that this meridian nurturing flux point technique was actually a torn fragment of a technique which smashed the common sense of origin world. Strengthening flux points, nurturing meridians. The meridian nurturing flux point technique he had only dealt with 2 of the 5 fields mentioned before. According to the author, the deity had said that if someone nurtured their meridians, strengthened their flux points, expanded their muscles, transformed their blood, and substituted their internal organs to the point of perfection, then with the aid of some heavenly materials, their flux points could break through the universal limit and be advanced to the next stage. If someone was successful in developing their flux points to that point, they would have smashed through the shackles of the deity realm and gained the chance to step into the realm of ancient god. After descending to the origin world, this was the first time that Yunmu had heard about such an idea and the existence of ancient god realm's threshold. From that, it could be clearly seen that the meridian nurturing flux point technique definitely belonged to ancient history. It had to be known that of all the natives that Yunmu had met in the origin world, none had advocated that flux points could be strengthened to the next stage. The so-called flux points strengthening techniques which Yunmu had been looking for mainly focused on dealing with the innately frail constitution of descenders. Those secret techniques were only complementing the deficiency and not developing the flux points to the next stage. However, when he read the complete manuscript, he became aware that it wasn't that the strength and development of flux points had reached the limit, but that the people he'd met were too low level. If not for his trip to the Hall clan, Li Yunmu wouldn't have known that there existed ancient gods in the origin world who were even higher level than what the quasi-deities had been chasing after. Li Yunmu sighed faintly. The ancient god realm towards which the ancient secret technique pointed was extremely far from him. Besides, his manuscript was even incomplete. He had only obtained a fragment which would allow his body to be developed to the limit in the past. The remnant fragment was just that, which made it F***ing useless. It lacked 3 of its parts: expanding muscles, transforming blood, and substituting internal organs. After a long time, Li Yunmu returned to the real world. What he needed to accomplish right then was to complement what he had as a descender. All the other things could come later. Before long, Li Yunmu exited the room. He went back to Whale Island, but didn't stay there for a long time. After going to the neutral island city, he wantonly spent 30,000 life points to purchase a hoard of medicine and different materials before returning. Upon returning, he again went into seclusion in his room. By then, his heavenly world no longer contained the ape gods, which left it silent, without the previous liveliness and vitality. Following the steps from the meridian nurturing flux point technique, he first established a medicinal cauldron near the spring. After that he took out a number of medicinal herbs and other ingredients which he had purchased in Whale Island. That's right. The first step to complement weak constitution and strengthen flux points was to concoct elixirs. It thus could be seen that the so-called secret technique could only be used by those who were wealthy. The price to purchase a secret technique to supplement flux points was at least 5,000 contribution points. If the costs of herbs and other ingredients to be purchased were also added, then if one was born as a civilian with a weak constitution, they were out of luck. They would need 9,000 contribution points to supplement their deficiency. And that was not calculating the costs required to cultivate to physical flux expert and flux expert slayers. Fortunately, Li Yunmu was a wealthy person. His wealth wasn't in terms of silver sand coins used by ordinary people, but rather in the accumulated amount of currency used by the cultivators, life points. But even then, of the 1.3 million which he had obtained from the first sale of Croton, he didn't have much left. After using 3,000 contribution points to purchase flux binding pills, then another 3,000 to read the summary of the source manuscripts, and finally 3,000 more to purchase the ingredients, he had spent nearly 900,000 life points in less than 10 days. If such news was leaked out, his fellow disciples would probably fall into despair. 900,000 life points could purchase 900,000 grains of low-level Croton. That amount was even sufficient for some flux experts to last their whole life. However, although the investment was quite large, the harvest was also similarly enormous. All the 30 types of medicine and other ingredients were thrown into the cauldron by Li Yunmu, according to the sequence prescribed in the meridian nurturing flux point technique. Blood meridian fruit, rattan silk, lentigo grass, stone marrow, rare eel blood, juice from cold plum tree, moon lotus, the heart of devil gauze, and so on. Li Yunmu carefully looked at all the ingredients and cautiously threw them in one after another. Some needed to be thrown in the beginning, and some could be thrown only after reaching a certain temperature. There were also some which could only be thrown after crushing and mixing them with other ingredients. Even the fire under the cauldron required specific wood. If he made the slightest mistake in any of the procedures, the whole process would immediately fail. Li Yunmu understood that what he had wasn't just an ordinary secret recipe to complement the deficiency of flux points, but a unique recipe of meridian nurturing flux point technique. As for how potent it was when compared to other recipe to strengthen flux points, he would know the answer after testing the elixir he had just concocted. Fortunately, Li Yunmu wasn't refining the elixir alone, but had the system's precise guidance. Thus, he completed the extremely difficult process without any mishaps, which was one of the benefits of the system's assistance. If he had been someone else who wasn't an extremely high-class pill concocting master, then without testing for a few times, they certainly wouldn't have been able to succeed. But Li Yunmu was already done with it. After a few hours, when he opened the lid of the cauldron, he discovered the elixir boiling like a broth. According to the procedure, he took out a jade bottle of ice attribute and carefully poured the elixir in it. Only then did he breathe a sigh of relief. It truly hadn't been easy. Refining several tens of kilograms of medicinal herbs and ingredients had produced only several tens of grams of elixir in the end. After that, Li Yunmu didn't stop and filled a wooden bath which he had prepared long ago with water from the spring. He then poured 3 drops of the elixir into the tub of water. Instantly, the originally clear spring water turned vermilion color. Without any hesitation, Li Yunmu removed his clothes and shoes and jumped into the tub. Then he began to rotate the flux energy in his body according to the secret technique, and his entire body entered a special state. With each inhale and exhale, he began to gradually absorb the medicinal liquid. Chapter 370, One Day, 1,000 Miles. Time kept passing, and in a blink of an eye, 1 week was gone. During that whole time, Li Yunmu had remained in his room, staying in his heavenly world to complement the innate deficiency in his constitution. Every day, he would soak in the medicinal bath 3 times. After getting out of the bath, he would clearly sense the transformations in his body. According to Meridian Nurturing Flux Point method, human body was the root of everything. How much power one could accumulate as well as what level of power source they could hold, all of it depended on one's flesh. Their physical strength also determined what was the highest level of power source they could sustain. For an analogy, assume the human body was a glass. How large it was would determine the amount of water it could hold. The quality of the materials used to make it, in the meantime, would determine how hot could the temperature of the liquid be before the walls cracked. That's why although Li Yunmu possessed flame thunder energy, which was a divine level power, he couldn't use it proficiently. He couldn't cultivate or strengthen it, and every time he used it, he couldn't be excessive or his body would be crushed. System, what's the present strength of my physical body? On that day, Li Yunmu was finally unable to endure anymore and asked about the progress he had made. During the past 5-6 days, he could feel that he was becoming powerful every day, but he didn't know by how much. Your fleshly body's strength has already reached 29 oxen. This is an incredible pace of development. Moreover, host, your explosive flux energy has become even more formidable. Everything is strongly related to your cultivation of Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique, the system replied concisely. What? 29 oxen? At that instant, Li Yunmu was frightened by his own progress in the past few days. He almost couldn't believe that in 6 days in which he had been cultivating the Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique, the strength of his flesh had reached 29 oxen. Compared to his initial strength of 18 oxen, it was an increase of 11. What a terrifying progress speed! In other words, his strength had increased by roughly 2 oxen every day. That was outrageous. The system thought about it for a moment, then added, yes, apart from cultivating Meridian Nurturing Flux Point method, you have also had 5 meals every day. Since you have eaten a large amount of extreme grade power grain, your progress had been quicker. Otherwise, others would eternally remain unable to achieve that sort of progress speed. Only Li Yunmu knew how he had passed the past 6 days. It would be difficult for others to replicate his cultivation manner. Besides soaking in medicinal bath 3 times every day as well as rotating his flux energy according to Meridian Nurturing Flux Point technique, he ate the amount of power grains which his body could sustain every day. It surpassed what even ordinary great flux masters used. Usually, an ordinary great flux expert's body could sustain at most 20 grains of extreme grade power grain to maintain bodily functions as well as improve their physical strength. This was the extreme limit. Once their body informed them that it was full, they wouldn't eat. That was because even if they ate more, it would be in vain. The extra power grains wouldn't be absorbed by their body to be converted into strength. However, Li Yunmu was different. Every day he ate 5 meals and consumed around 30 grains of extreme grade power grains each time. In other words, he consumed around 150 grains of extreme grade power grain every day. When his body's absorption ability became better, he could even consume 200 grains, which was easily 10 times more than ordinary great flux masters. The reason behind this was the medicinal bath based on the recipe in Meridian nurturing flux point technique, as well as his cultivation of Great Sun Thunder Tyrant body muscle marrow secrets. Given this fact, the disparity between divine level body refining techniques compared to other body refining techniques could be easily witnessed. Clearly, the world punishment which Li Yunmu had accidentally attracted had left behind a great boon for him, which he himself hadn't realized until then. Although he couldn't cultivate the deity-level power source, as long as the great sun and thunder nurtured his body, the amount of power grains which could be absorbed by him would surpass that of flux experts of same level by several times. Fortunately, there may be many things he lacked, but power grains, specifically extreme-grade power grains, was one thing that he certainly didn't lack. Otherwise, given that every day he consumed more than 100 of them, he'd have gone bankrupt long ago. The amount he consumed could be equaled to 600-700 inferior grade grains for ordinary people, or some 700 life points. Only the masters of the top 10 rooms could probably bear such everyday expenses, and even them with extreme difficulty. Then what about the progress of strengthening flux points? Li Yunmu inquired again. Your flux points have around 80% of natives' strength. The system had clearly analyzed it long ago, given how quickly it had replied. The strength of Li Yunmu's flux points was only 60% of a native's before he started cultivating Meridian nurturing flux point technique, but now it was close to 80%. Although he still hadn't repaired the flaw in his body completely, he was quickly getting close to it. Li Yunmu was convinced that as long as he could soak in the medicinal bath for 10 more days, there wouldn't be much disparity between his flux points and those of a native. He would then be the first one to accomplish the long-cherished dream of Earth's quasi-deities. He suddenly recalled that tomorrow would be the day when he was supposed to meet up with Zhang Chuan. Thinking about it, he decided to stop his seclusion for the time being. There's still half a day left. Since my flux points have been strengthened, I should try to pour flux energy into them. Thinking about tomorrow when he would face unknown circumstances, Li Yunmu couldn't feel satisfaction in his heart. Instead, he grasped the opportunity to increase his strength. Since the strength of his flux points had been increased by 20%, more flux energy could be poured into the 72 flux points in his body. The next instant, Li Yunmu took out a flux binding pill without any hesitation and swallowed it to begin cultivating again. He could clearly sense that the nature of the power provided by the flux binding pill was similar to the flux energy crystals in his earth. But even if the pill was extremely small in size, the flux energy contained within it far surpassed the amount accumulated within a high-grade rainbow crystal. Such ample flux energy! How exactly is this flux binding pill refined? Until then, Li Yunmu hadn't been able to figure out the method to refine flux binding pills. If he learned it, he could probably quickly catch up with to the people of Night or Wang Hu's caliber. Based on his understanding, a flux binding pill contained 50 times more flux energy than a rainbow flux crystal. It was no wonder then that one pill cost 300 contribution points or 30,000 life points. Li Yunmu had only swallowed one pill, but the 72 flux points which had been recently broadened were filled completely. The total amount of time used was 1 hour and 30 minutes. Not only did the flux binding pill contain 50 times more energy than a rainbow crystal, the absorption speed was also unprecedentedly quick. For Li Yunmu, who experienced this sort of cultivation for the first time, it was like taking a rocket to travel after using a car for his whole life. System, what's the current strength of my flux energy? He asked.